Step outside on the right kind of morning, and the world disappears. The trees at the end of the street become shapes, the shapes become suggestions, and then there is nothing, just white, just silence, just the strange, unsettling feeling of being at the edge of something you cannot see past. You know what fog is. You know it is water vapor, suspended particles, a meteorological event with a name and an explanation and no particular intention toward you. But strip that knowledge away. Put yourself in the body of a person who has never heard of water vapor, who has no word for meteorology, who wakes before dawn to find that the world they knew yesterday has been erased overnight. What do you do? What do you think? What do you feel when the landscape that kept you oriented, that told you where the water was, where the predators might be, where the path through the trees lay, has been replaced by something that has no color, no sound, and no end? The real answer to what ancient humans thought about fog is far stranger than you might expect. Fear would have been part of it, not the mild unease that fog produces in a modern person on a morning commute, but something deeper and more primitive. Your nervous system was designed by evolution to respond to the loss of visual information as a potential threat signal. When you cannot see your environment, you cannot assess it for danger. When you cannot assess it for danger, your stress systems activate. Your heart rate rises. Your attention sharpens to a state of hypervigilance, scanning for sound and movement in the absence of visual data. This response is not a quirk of modern anxiety. It is an ancient survival mechanism. And in the ancient world, where the inability to see predators or navigate terrain could mean death, fog would have triggered it far more intensely than it does in you. But fear is only the beginning of the story. Human minds do not stay in fear. They move from fear to interpretation, and interpretation is where the story of fog gets strange. Across virtually every ancient culture that has left us any record, fog occupies a specific and consistent category in the human imagination. Not simply bad weather, not simply reduced visibility, but a threshold state, a place between places, a time when the normal rules of the world might be suspended. The ancient Celts believed that fog was a manifestation of Tir Nanog, the other world, bleeding through into the physical realm. When fog rolled in from the sea or descended from the mountains, it was understood as the boundary between the living world and the world of spirits becoming temporarily permeable. Journeys begun in fog were considered dangerous, not because you might get lost on the path, but because you might arrive somewhere that was not where you intended, somewhere else entirely. The ancient Norse traditions carried a similar weight. Niflheim, the realm of primordial ice and mist, was one of the two original realms from which creation itself emerged. Fog and mist in Norse cosmology were not atmospheric events, but fundamental substances, as real and as significant as fire or stone. When the world was created, it was from the interaction of fire and cold mist that the first existence arose. Fog was not weather, it was one of the building blocks of reality. In ancient Chinese thought, fog was associated with the concept of qi, the vital force that animates the world. A thick fog was not an absence but a presence, a concentration of that vital energy in one place, in a form that could be seen and felt but not touched. Landscapes heavy with mist were considered spiritually charged, places where the invisible forces that governed life and death were visible, however briefly, to the human eye. This is not coincidence. This is pattern. Across cultures separated by oceans and centuries, and completely different metaphysical systems, fog landed in the same conceptual category, the in-between, the threshold, the place where normal categories break down. And there is a very good reason for this. Developmental psychologist Jean Piaget argued that human minds are fundamentally categorizing machines. We survive by sorting the world into known and unknown, safe and dangerous, familiar and strange. Fog attacks all of these categories simultaneously. In fog, the familiar becomes unfamiliar, the known becomes unknown. The path you have walked 100 times becomes uncertain. The boundary between where you are and where something dangerous might be disappears. Ancient minds, encountering this, did what human minds always do when the normal categories fail. They reached for a higher category, something that could contain the experience, something that explained why the world had momentarily stopped working the way it was supposed to. And the explanation that human minds across the world independently arrived at was not random. Fog behaves like something that has intention. It arrives without warning. It obscures things that were there before. It lifts on its own schedule. It does not respond to human action or human presence. These are the behavioral signatures of an agent, of something that acts, rather than a mere event. Psychologist Pascal Boyer, at Washington University in St. Louis, has studied the cognitive roots of supernatural belief and found that human brains are strongly predisposed to detect agency in ambiguous situations. We are hyperactive agency detectors, as Boyer calls it. When something in the environment moves or changes in ways we cannot explain, our first instinct is to ask who or what caused it, not how. Fog, with its unpredictable appearance and disappearance, its behavior of concealment, its apparent indifference to human needs, was a perfect target for this cognitive tendency. Something was causing the fog, something was hiding behind it, something was using it. This is not primitive thinking, this is human thinking, operating exactly as it was designed to. The same cognitive architecture that caused ancient humans to see spirits in fog causes modern humans to see faces in clouds, intention in coincidences, and agency in random events. The hardware has not changed, only the software has been updated. There is a final dimension to this, worth considering. Fog is one of very few natural phenomena that creates a version of sensory isolation in the open world. It removes distance as a concept. It makes navigation by visual landmark impossible. It creates an environment in which a person is, perceptually, alone even when others are nearby. And in a world where your sense of safety depended on knowing where you were and who was around you, this kind of isolation was not trivial. Researcher Craig Fairman, who has written about the history of darkness and light in human experience, notes that environments that eliminate visual reference create psychological states that are distinct from anything that fully lit environments produce. The absence of the visible world does not produce neutral experience. It produces a particular kind of internal focus, a pulling inward, a heightened sensitivity to whatever remains perceivable. Sound becomes louder. Imagination becomes more active. The boundary between the external world and the internal one becomes thinner. Ancient humans standing in fog were not just standing in bad weather. They were briefly inside themselves in a way the open, visible world did not permit. And in that inward space, something happened. Something always happens when the external world goes quiet and the internal world gets louder. They thought about what they could not see. They told themselves something about what it meant. Step outside on the right kind of morning, and the world disappears. You call it fog and move on. For most of human history, that was not an option. The disappearance of the world required an answer, and the answers that came, across every culture and every era, were not so different from each other. Something is here, something is between, something is at the edge of what can be seen. You still feel it, you just have a different name for what it is.